Welcome to Court of the Crane, where history meets the shadows of crime and justice. In today's episode, we venture into the darkest corners of the Joseon Dynasty. Here, treason and murder weren't just crimes, they were mirrors of power, ambition, and fear. From princes betrayed to concubines plotting in secret, from scholars executed for a single word, to villagers punished for shocking acts. Joseon's legal system was as rigid as it was ruthless. Tonight, we'll step into a world where a single word could kill, and a single betrayal could erase a family from history. Founded in 1392, Joseon was built on Confucian ideals, where laws were not just rules, but morality enforced by fear. The Joseon legal code, modeled after Ming Dynasty China's, spelled out punishments with chilling precision. Execution was central to this system, but it was never only about removing an offender. It was about making a statement. Punishments were both symbolic and judicial. Beheading was swift, common for ordinary criminals. Strangulation was quieter, often reserved for nobility. There was slow slicing. This was reserved for parricide or treason. It was the most horrific form of death. There was also forced poison. This was considered a leniency for royals or the elite, allowing them to die privately by drinking a toxic brew. There was also exile. This was for lesser crimes or political convenience, though exile often meant a slow death through isolation. Each punishment carried meaning. Strangulation could spare a noble's dignity. Sasa, or forced poison, acknowledged that there was status while still removing a threat. But treason, also called moban, was different. It was the ultimate crime, not just against the throne, but against heaven itself. Under the principle of Yunjuaje, guilt spread like a stain. One man's betrayal could doom his entire clan. Parents, children, even distant relatives could be executed or enslaved, ensuring that no seed of rebellion survived. Public display reinforced the lesson. Heads of the condemned were mounted on gates, and bodies could be paraded around before burial. The message was clear. Disobedience was not just punished, it was erased. This was the stage upon which the dramas of treason and murder would unfold, and Joseon history gave no shortage of examples. If murder could doom a man, treason could annihilate a dynasty. In Joseon, moban, rebellion, or betrayal, was the ultimate crime, and when the stakes were the throne, lives were shattered. One of the most infamous examples came in 1453, when Prince Sejong, later King Sejong, staged a coup. Under the banner of loyalty, he executed his own political rivals, senior statesmen who had sworn to protect the boy king. Dozens of families were destroyed, their estates seized, and their names blotted out. It was a reminder that justice in Joseon could be the mask of ambition. Half a century later, in 1506, another purge unfolded, the coup against King Yeonseong-gun. His tyranny had bred resentment, and his officials moved against him. Yeonseong was deposed and died in exile, but his allies and relatives were executed en masse. Even in rebellion against a tyrant, blood had to flow. Perhaps the most tragic story, however, is that of the Crown Prince Sado in the mid-18th century. Accused of madness and of endangering the dynasty, Sado was ordered by his own father, King Yeongjo, to climb into a rice chest. He was sealed inside and left to suffocate over 8 agonizing days. The form was not formal treason, but in Joseon, when paranoia and politics mingled, even a prince could be condemned like a traitor. If treason destroyed dynasties, murder shattered families. And in Joseon, even that was never simple. murder in Joseon carried its own moral weight. It was not all equal under the law. The method of death depended not just on the crime, but on who you were. Ordinary homicide often meant beheading, but parricide, killing a parent or an elder, was treated as the vilest of crimes. These offenders could face slow slicing, their deaths dragged out to emphasize the rupture of Confucian order. One notorious case was Hui-bin, the concubine of King Seokjong. When she conspired to poison Queen Inhyun in 1701, she was condemned to death by poison. This was Sasa, the forced suicide reserved for royals and high-ranking figures. She was spared the public spectacle, but her downfall shocked the court, a reminder that murder within palace walls was never simply personal, but political. Another case is that of Nan-jeong, the powerful 16th century consort. She manipulated her way into influence, reportedly orchestrating poisonings and eliminating rivals. When her crimes were uncovered, she hanged herself rather than face execution. Her story became a warning about ambition cloaked in beauty and charm. For the commoner, murder was more straightforward: swift execution, sometimes exile for mitigating circumstances. But for the powerful, murder trials were spectacles, entangled with politics, reputation, and the struggle for survival within the palace. In Joseon, even murder was less about the act itself than about the order it threatens. Treason and murder weren't just legal issues. They revealed the very fabric of Joseon society. Hierarchy ruled every interaction. Loyalty to the king was sacred. Women, concubines, and scholars could wield influence, but they risked life and legacy. Factional disputes often hid behind treason charges. Historical figures like Prince Sado and Nan-jeong remind us that survival requires cunning, obedience, and sometimes cruelty. In a society so stratified, every betrayal carried mortal risk. So how does the shadow of history shape Korea today? During the Joseon Dynasty, punishments such as slow slicing and public displays of severed heads were used to instill fear. These practices were formally abolished in the late 19th century, as Korea underwent legal reforms influenced by modern international norms. By the time of the Gabo reforms, torture and mutilation were outlawed, marking a shift towards viewing human dignity as a legal principle. In Joseon, crimes like parricide carried harsher penalties than ordinary murder, often involving especially brutal executions. Modern Korea narrowed many status-based distinctions, but parricide remains a separate, aggravated offense under Article 252, a lingering hierarchy within homicide law. Joseon Korea used executions as spectacles of state power. In modern Korea, the death penalty technically remained on the books, but its practice has been in abeyance since the last executions in December 1997 under President Kim Il-sung. Since then, Korea has been considered an abolitionist in practice, though debates over full abolition continue in the National Assembly. The transformation is remarkable, from terror and spectacle to the rule of law and human rights. Yet the echoes remain. Power, morality, and fear are eternally intertwined. The story of treason and murder in the Joseon Dynasty remind us that the law is never just about rules. It's about power, values, and fear. Where Joseon used public executions and terror to enforce loyalty, modern Korea relies on constitutions, courts, and human rights. But the echoes remain. Each betrayal, each violent act, carries the weight of history. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into the crimes and punishments of Joseon. If you enjoyed this episode of Court of the Crane, subscribe for more stories where history meets justice. And remember, in every palace corridor, in every shadowed corner, Ambition still leaves a trace of blood.